At issue, a budget strategy meant to revive the Liberal government, but early polling suggests the party has not yet received the bump they were hoping for.
It's not about political popularity. It's about doing the right thing to set every generation up for success.
How are Canadians responding to the budget? What more can the Liberals do to close the gap between them and the Conservatives? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it all down on At Issue tonight. Chantal Hebert, Coyne and Althia Raj. Good to see you all. I don't know really like how soon you should expect to see any kind of bounce from a budget, but I would also argue that this budget is not just a week old. It's more like 3 weeks old because of the strategy that the Liberals put in place of rolling it out. But how concerning should this be for the Liberals? Chantal, I'll start with you.
Well, we've had, this week, half a dozen polls, and they all look the same. And they all look like the polls that were published before the budget rollout and the budget. So basically, you're looking at polls that show very little movement. If I were in a Liberal war room, I would ask myself whether Canadians have just tuned out the Prime Minister and the Liberal message and its messengers. I've also noticed that in the background to all of this budget rollout, there's been quite a bit of talk and interest in something called leadership maneuvers. Dominique Leblanc got written up in the Globe column. Mark Carney seems to have a lot of speaking engagements to Liberal crowds. So put together, what that tells me is there are more Liberals today looking at the polls and thinking to themselves, Justin Trudeau may be doing things that people approve. There's support for the housing chapter, for instance, but we need a new messenger because he's lost his audience.
So, I mean, some of this, as Chantal says, Andrew, some of the polls do suggest that Canadians like pieces of what they're hearing from the Liberals. But I also wonder, do we think that Canadians are paying attention at all? Is this also like it's just not what Canadians are spending time talking about right now?
Well, the Liberals went to great lengths to make them pay attention. So that 2 or 3 week, effectively, election campaign that preceded the budget was not that was not usual. So they were clearly banking on something coming out of this. They were betting a lot on it, and I don't think they can now turn around and say, oh, well, we didn't expect to do very much out of this budget. They were hoping. Yeah. Now, it's granted that's not always the case, and it may be, as Chantal said, that the Prime Minister as salesman now, and perhaps the Finance Minister as well, is simply not connecting with Canadians. The approval rating or disapproval rating I saw in one of the polls for the Prime Minister was 66%. That's getting into last days of Mulroney territory. But also, I think even the message, at a time when people are very concerned about inflation and affordability, and when the message coming out of the opposition thing has been that is connected to higher spending, bigger deficits, to come in with essentially unchanged deficits, more spending is not necessarily, I think, plugging into the public mood. When people are, I think also don't necessarily equate higher taxes with fairness. I think there's some polling data on this, that they see this as not necessarily good for the economy. I saw a couple polls on the specific thing of the capital gains tax, which I really think the Liberals were hoping to set the woods on fire with. And it was a plurality in one poll thought it was a good idea, a plurality in another poll thought it was a bad idea, but certainly not the kind of big, overwhelming, stick it to the rich type of a message that I think they were hoping to get from the public. So does this mean that it's all over for them? No, but they're running out of bullets. They're running out of chances to connect with Canadians in the limited time that's left before the next election.
Althia?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if the next election's in 18 months, there is a lot of stuff that can happen in that time. Well, we don't even know if it will be 18 months. Maybe not. Maybe the NDP will surprise us. But, I think Trump's election could have an impact. All this talk about another Quebec referendum can have an impact. There are international events that we don't see coming that could have an impact. Maybe Justin Trudeau decides to take a walk in the nice sunny weather of Ottawa. Regardless, I do think it's a little early to put the X. A big challenge for the Liberals has been for almost a year now, the fact that a lot of Canadians have tuned out the Prime Minister, the party's primary spokesperson, to Chantal's point. That is a huge challenge when you're actually trying to sell something. But I question whether it is too early to talk about this, because this is an election budget. It's 400 plus pages. I mean, it was a really big brick. And there's stuff there that is micro-targeting certain communities. You know, there was money for like Black Canadians for their mental health. There was money for sick arts in Toronto. There was money for the Muslim community, the Jewish community. So it will take some time for all those ministers or designated MPs to do their rounds in ethnic media and this very, you know, minutia to kind of build momentum. So far, like the big things that have been communicated seem to be popular with Canadians, the housing that you mentioned, the capital gains tax, Leger had it at 56%. But again, with that, you know, when 2017, when Bill Morneau announced the changes or the finance department announced the changes, we didn't feel the anger really palpitate for like 3 months. And then it was like, whoa, what just happened? Yeah. So I think it's a little early to put the X. I do think they have gone back, let's just make one last point, to a kind of tried and true Liberal strategy. Like this is basically the 2015 budget. It is, we are going to spend more, we're going to have deficits, we're going to ask the wealthy to pay so that we can have a future for Canada and Canadians. And it worked for them then, and they're hoping that it will work for them again. But can you trust the same people to deliver on the things that they said in 2015 they would do that they haven't done? I don't know.
But the thing is, it's, go ahead.
Chantal and then Andrew,
2015 it was fresh. Now it's old and tired, for one. Two, on the capital gains tax. If the Liberals were hoping to, you know, use it as something that stands for fairness between generations, it would have helped if the Conservatives had picked a fight with them on it, and they are not. And
not
absent
yet.
that
fight,
I suspect that this is not a battlefield that is of interest to the Conservatives under their current branding. And I agree that there are a lot of issues that are micro-targeting audiences. But the real question is, are any of those initiatives the kind of initiatives that make people go to the ballot box and cast a ballot for the government? And I don't think so. I don't think you buy votes with retail initiatives, or at least every government I've seen that tried it ended up in opposition.
Andrew.
Yeah, in 2015, you're coming off a period of relative fiscal conservatism. People were looking for a change. They were willing to go in a different direction. We're coming off a period now of relative fiscal liberalism, and people are also, I think, looking for a change in direction. So to come out with the same old thing, I don't think is necessarily reading the Times terribly well. I think to come back to the particular miss in this budget at a time when I think a large section of certainly of the opinion-making community and more so the public is very concerned about the economy basically being stuck in the water, that we're not getting the growth we need, that in fact the GDP per capita is declining. To come up with a budget that, not by my measure, but by the measure of former Liberal finance ministers, John Manley and Bill Morneau, the former Bank of Canada governor and possible future Liberal leader Mark Carney, all of whom said they missed the boat on this. They did not address the growth question. So you've got blue Liberals essentially looking at this and going, I can't see myself in this. This is a party that's basically abandoned us. That's got to hurt them in terms of pulling together an electoral coalition going forward as well.
Althia.
Everything that Andrew said, yes, he resumed the debate well. I guess I will say a few things that I would be watching for in this budget to see if there is sort of a momentum that can build. I do think the housing, it's so big. It really does force you to kind of reimagine what you think the government's role in housing is. But the challenge with that is they only have a year to show movement. And if they cannot show movement in that time, then I don't think they have a leg to stand on. The other thing I would flag is I think the relationship with the premiers, and we saw that last week with the Council of Federation letter where they said, butt out of our area of jurisdiction. But, and we've talked about this on the panel, the government, I think actually wants to have a fight with the premiers. Yes. They want to be able to say, you know, you guys are not moving on this. You are not being cooperative. You are not matching. The reason that we're not getting to where we need is your fault. And in a way, they're stealing the province's playbook and using it against them. So I think those are two interesting points of tension. That I think will determine whether or not this kind of the framing around the budget takes off.
Last quick word to you, Chantal.
But it does put the government, if you flag those two, on a collision course with itself, because if it wants to demonstrate that its housing agenda works, it needs cooperation with the provinces. And by the way, all those provinces that dislike the budget got a nice gift with the capital gains tax changes. It is going to go to their bottom line in a way that all provincial finance ministers are probably saying, this is great and we don't have to wear it.
Okay, we're going to pause this conversation. I'm sure we'll talk more about this in the coming weeks. But when we come back, we're going to take a look at Pierre Poilievre's roadside meeting with some protesters.
Everyone's happy with what you're doing.
Really?
Fighting
That's
against
awesome to
the
hear.
tax. Everyone hates the tax.
Yeah.
Poilievre made a surprise stop at an anti-carbon tax convoy this week and called the Prime Minister a liar. So who is the Conservative leader trying to court there? That's next. Pierre Poilievre is facing criticism for meeting with carbon tax protesters who seem to be tied to extremism.
We saw you, so I told the team, let's pull over and say hello.
The Prime Minister says Poilievre is stoking division and fear for his own gain.
Really shows that he will do anything to win.
So what's to be made of Poilievre's pit stop with protesters? How will it play out for him politically? Here to break it down some more, Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. Althia, I'll start with you because you wrote about this. Well, you combined both of our topics nicely in a column, but I'll start with you because that was where you started. What do you think this meeting does for Pierre Poilievre, for good or for bad?
I think it was an error in judgment that the Conservative leader showed. You almost get a sense from the video that he seems to recognize that, oh, what did I walk into? What bothers me about this video is not that he stopped to talk to people who might have been involved with things that he should not want to be involved in. At one point, frankly, he says, oh, so when I axed the tax, because this is an encampment that is apparently they're protesting the tax, but some of the same people have been involved in protesting COVID vaccine mandatory vaccination. He says, when I axe the tax, you guys will be able to go home because they've been sitting there for, at the time, 23 days living in their car. And one of the women says, oh, how soon will that be? Clearly she wants to be able to go home. And he doesn't tell her to go home. Like, if you care about people and alleviating suffering, you should tell people that you will axe the tax, and it doesn't matter if they are living in their car at the side of the road or not, or if they're at home in their warm bed. It doesn't matter. They do not need to be doing this, and it would be healthier for them, probably. I mean, certain people like to have a sense of community, and maybe this is where they get their fun. But I think if you really, really want people's best interest at heart, surely you can tell them that they're not the reason why there is a carbon tax in place. You know, like that to me, I know this is not where you thought I was going to go, Rosie.
No, it's fine. It's totally fine.
But I was very disturbed by that one idea.
You get to go where you want to go. That's why you guys are invited. Chantal, what did you make of the encounter?
Well, I understand the temptation to go shake hands with people who seem to be fellow travelers on what you have made your main slogan, Axe the Tax, except that what drew Mr. Poilievre's attention were the Axe the Tax flags, but also there were a number of F. Trudeau flags, which have become common. There were enough of them that they wanted him to take a picture with that backdrop, and he wisely chose to have his picture taken with a different backdrop. But I was trying to think, I've covered a number of opposition leaders who became Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, Jean Chrétien, Stephen Harper, Justin Trudeau. I don't think any of them would have made a stop or a detour if they'd seen flags that said F whoever was the Prime Minister of the day at that point. It becomes a matter of civil discourse and a matter of principle, and I think on that it was an error in judgment.
I mean, there was obviously, Andrew, some notion about appealing to the argument that he is making against the carbon tax, and to a segment of the population that he has met before. This group is sort of self-describes as a convoy, and certainly shared some of the views of the convoy that was here in Ottawa that Conservatives went out and met with as well.
Yeah, at some point he has to decide whether he's running for Prime Minister or running for opposition leader. You're 20 points ahead in the polls. At some point, do you start to consolidate? Do you start to bring people in rather than telling people who you don't like? And this is certainly still appealing to the same strategy of whipping up emotions and then playing to resentments and fears.
Yeah.
I wouldn't make too much of it. I think people, there was a Diagolon patch somewhere scrawled on the side of the thing. I don't imagine he wants much to do with that group, particularly after what they said about his wife last year. But it's the same. There's a context, though, to this, which is, hanging out with the lawless mob that occupied the streets of Ottawa was probably the low point, but also, some of the kookier stuff with the World Economic Forum, et cetera. It's winking at that audience, that group, the People's Party voters, saying, well, you can come, you can stay inside the tent. At the same time, he wants mainstream voters to think, okay, he's just doing that for political reasons. He doesn't really believe this stuff. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably true, but the voters should not be put in the position of having to wonder whether the next Prime Minister of Canada is a mainstream, normal politician or somebody who hangs out with extremists.
And the Diagolon thing, when I talk about extremists, it's the Diagolon flag that we're pointing to. Whether he saw it or knew it was there is, I think, a different question. Chantal and then Althia.
Yes, fair question. With Mr. Poilievre have detoured to stop and have a talk with people who were demonstrating for the climate. Yeah, I know you know the answer to that. But for the average voter, having a prime minister who can actually talk about the environment with people who are concerned, that would be the vast majority of Canadians, works better than having a prime minister who seems to send a message that he will be happy to talk with people who occupy Parliament Hill or occupy the border between two provinces with views that make them believe that if they sit there forever, politicians will cave. These kinds of events that he's encouraging now will come back to haunt a Conservative government if and when there is one led by Mr. Poilievre, because those tactics will be used on him.
Yeah, and I thought your starting point, Althia, in the column, which others have mentioned, is why do something like this when you're 20 points ahead? Like, you don't have to pull over and talk to everybody on the street. You just don't have to.
No, I mean, I supposed that he felt a little comfortable, a little too comfortable to take that risk. I think right now, we're living in a different era than we were 20 years ago. Everybody has a cell phone. You have to expect that everywhere you go, there will be a record of it and it will be broadcast on social media. And you don't know what you're entering. And that's not just for this group of individuals that are protesting in the carbon tax. You don't know that about any type of protest. And you should be very careful about where you go and what symbols might be there and who you're associating with if you don't know who these people are. But beyond that, I think, Andrew said he's kind of, winking at conspiracy theorists. He's not just winking. He is engaging them. He is affirming what they have said on the World Economic Forum, for example, that Justin Trudeau's government is run by the World Economic Forum. We've seen that during door knocks. And placating, encouraging people who, frankly, are detached from reality is not the kind of leadership that we should expect for somebody who wants to be the prime minister of the country. Like, you have to have a certain baseline of this is what the facts are. And if we don't encourage our political leaders to have a discussion based on facts, then we are not going to be able to come as a country, as a society together and talk about big questions that the country faces. And we will not be able to find grounds where we can cooperate, where we can agree, even agree to disagree. That's the scary part. And you can kind of see what's happening down south. And I don't think anybody in this country wants to have what's happening in the United States happen in Canada.
Quickly, Andrew.
I'm not sure if it's overconfidence or if they're still nervous about the People's Party and want to make sure that they keep that tamped down and don't give them
They don't need those votes.
Well, I think those votes in close ridings, those can matter. And I think they want to make sure that doesn't happen. But the thing is, it maybe doesn't show up in the polls now in terms of hurting them. But if you sow doubts like that, if you leave doubts that don't show up now, but they're the kind of thing that can show up in the heat and the pressure cooker of an election campaign, if people are nervous about this, if they're leaving mainstream voters wondering, what's this guy all about? So that's the potential price. We'll see whether he has to pay it or not.
Very quickly, Chantal. Very quickly.
And they would be wrong, the Conservatives, to believe that they have closed their deal with voters who did not vote Conservative in 2021, because from anecdotal evidence, that's not the case.
Okay. Thank you all
and the
very
clear
much. I
message
gotta go.
today.
I gotta go.
Sorry,
I
it's just
gotta
that
go.
Pierre Poilievre is their worst enemy. Like, is his
Okay.
own worst enemy.
Honda has plans for a new EV battery plant in Alliston, Ontario, with the help of billions in federal and provincial investment.
As a government, we're making choices to invest, to draw in these important companies that were creating jobs.
So what's to be made of this big new investment? Is Canada attracting investors or subsidizing a whole sector? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. I suppose the answer could be it's doing both of those things. But I mean, this is a significant amount of money. It's a big deal for Ontario. Andrew, is this the way that you, and I almost know your answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is this the way that you build an industry? Like, do you need some of this incentive in order to get a company like Honda to choose Canada over all the other places it could have done this?
Well, first of all, just on the expense, it's $5 billion for what they claim is 1,000 jobs. That's $5 million a job. You could hire 5 times as many people at $100,000 a year for 10 years for the same money. But of course, you're not actually creating 1,000 jobs because there's no shortage of jobs in Ontario. You're basically luring people and resources away from other sectors. You always destroy as many jobs as you create when you're playing this kind of game. Why are you doing? Because you think you're going to get, what, first mover advantage in electric vehicles and electric vehicle batteries? I got news for them. The Chinese have been at this for 20 years.
Yes.
So all they're really doing is plowing a lot of money into an industry that they think is going to be a winner, but where they're only going to be basically matching other countries' subsidies. So it's not like we're going to create some massive empire in Canada in this industry. And it's not clear whether electric vehicles are going to take over in quite the way that they are. There's a lot of doubts about it in the marketplace right now. If they do, it's not clear that this particular battery technology is going to be the one that's going to take over the world. They're making enormous bets, $50 billion before this when you include interest costs and tax write-offs for the 3 plants before this. And they're now going to add another $5 billion to it. It's an enormous bet with not just an uncertain payoff, but almost a certainty that it's not going to be worth the money.
Yeah. I guess the difference between the previous announcements with Volkswagen and Stellantis is those were subsidies. These are tax credits, so it's a little bit different, maybe a little more
distinction
palatable. Well, I thought maybe that would make it slightly more palatable to Andrew. Maybe not. Chantal.
I think for all the talk about being ahead of some curve, they're actually playing defense on this in the sense that they're trying to protect the auto industry.
Yes, for sure.
And trying to avoid Southern Ontario to be carved out of it by making these rather massive taxpayer investments. Whether that's going to turn out to be a good bet or not, we won't know for a while. But what I don't expect is for Pierre Poilievre to say he's going to take the chips off the table from that bet. And why I say that? Because if you look back at those pictures you showed, who was standing right next to the Prime Minister beaming? The Conservative Premier of Ontario. So I don't expect Pierre Poilievre to campaign in Ontario against both Doug Ford and Justin Trudeau.
It would be pretty hard to undo, Althia, I think.
Yeah, you got a sense during the first announcement, the Volkswagen announcement, that they weren't really on side and that there was sort of a schism between the local MPs and the mayor of St. Thomas, who used to be a Conservative MP, and the team around Mr. Poilievre, but you don't get that sense at all. And, we talked a little bit earlier about how, the Conservatives have not come out against the capital gains changes. They have not come out and said anything critical about this either so far. So I have to say, I think there were a lot of skeptics about the government's strategy last year when the big announcements started happening. But now it seems like they have managed to build a cluster. And to Chantal's point, like they needed to, we knew they needed to, but they have succeeded, I think, or they will have succeeded a generation from now. We will know whether or not we are right in ensuring that you have that market access with the United States, that there is an auto industry in Ontario. And they're willing to pump a lot of money, and the provinces are willing to pump a lot of money. It was interesting that we got to be a bit of a fly on the wall in terms of the discussions between Quebec and Ontario and who was going to win and not. So there's a little bit of lifting of the curtain. I do wonder if it will accentuate some regional tensions, a feeling that Ontario is getting a large chunk of the pie, but we'll see what the premiers eventually say about that.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all very much. That is At Issue for this week. Don't forget, you can catch The National on YouTube. I know lots of you watch us there. And CBC Gem, you can catch me on Rosemary Barton Live Sundays at 10 a.m. Eastern. Thanks so much for watching.